Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we have another book review for you, and it's another indie. And this time it is a debut sci-fi novel from a fellow booktuber. This is Alpha. This is by K.D. Marchesi, known as a fictional escapist here on YouTube. This released November 20th, so today when this video goes up, I did receive an ARC copy for review of this, so thank you to Kris for that one. And this is book one in their planned Alpha Cycle series. As always, we shall talk a little bit about the story, characters, world building, as well as presentation before my final thoughts at the end of the video. So let's dive straight in. So in this one, we follow our main character of Caleb. Caleb is the son of a rich businessman who has been involved in some form of medical research, lost his mother at a young age, and has very much felt like the trophy child spare part that dad didn't want up to this point. Been living the life of luxury, and he's getting ready for another soiree, another party, where he's sure he's going to be shown off. However, during this party, a friend that he has kind of had a bit of a falling out with previously, for reasons that becomes clear within the story, because there's a lot of parallels between these two characters, comes to him and says, look, do you know what your dad is working on? And whilst the party is going on, they break into the lab and discover that there is something going on here, only to be discovered, escorted back to the party, at which point the true depth of his father's plot becomes clear. A number of the people here are part of experiments, including Caleb and Argo themselves. Fast forward, and Caleb washes up on an island somewhere, knowing nothing but a strange, almost feral feeling inside themselves, and it quickly becomes apparent that there is some form of change going on because of whatever experiments he's been subject to without his knowledge or consent. From this point forward, you have kind of a survival sci-fi effect going on, as Caleb struggles to first of all deal with his transformation into whatever is happening. He's also in a new environment, doesn't know anything, doesn't really have any survival skills to speak of whatsoever, and begins to come across other people that have been part of these experiments but haven't quite gone the same way that his do. And as you work through this, you find out about conspiracies, alliances, other experiments that have failed, the side effects, and other big companies and potentially governments involved. The idea of genetic modification for a weapon is not a particularly new one in fiction, but that doesn't take away from the fact that as a concept, it really is a fascinating one. The idea of breeding kind of super soldiers does work really, really well, and there's a natural sort of almost horror element to the idea of genetic manipulation in this way. You also have a bit of a found family thing going on here with the groups that Caleb comes into contact with, and some growth of the character. So overall, this is a very, very solid first part of this series. I like the concepts at play here. Let's dive though into the characters. There are a lot of characters in this. I'm going to focus on Caleb, and I will touch briefly on some of the others, including Argo in particular. But starting with Caleb, and Kris does something that I think is quite brave and a bit of a risk for me personally, in that Caleb comes across as a bit of a dick at the beginning. In fact, no, not a bit, quite a lot. He comes across as quite entitled, high opinion of himself. The world is very much his plaything, so to speak. There's just one, and it's a very tiny, tiny detail, but he's getting ready for this party and thinking about, oh, well, I could probably get someone to take home and bed tonight and all that sort of thing. But the thing that really irks me was just left all the clothes on the floor in a heap for the maid to clean up. And that annoys me. That made me want to punch him straight out the gate. And this was then exacerbated by his interactions with Argo when Argo appears. So Argo comes across a little bit like the sort of the Golden Labrador character. very, very positive vibes of him right at the start. Feels like genuinely cares. You can tell there's some sort of backstory between the two. The thing that's really interesting, though, and this is good foreshadowing for later on, is the focus on the physicality of these two characters. It's very well described that Caleb is not a bad looking person. They have quite a physique, and then Argo appears, and Argo is like buff compared to him. And there's a jealousy thing playing off there. And that sort of mentality does play into some of the things that happen involving the genetic modification later on. Now, fortunately, in Caleb's case, once we get out of the party and he's alone on this sort of island and starts to discover people, a different side of him starts to kick in, almost a protective side. And I don't know if that is just from his own need to sort of find connection, or if that is linked to the genetic modification. Either could be true. And we do get a lot of information about Caleb's upbringing, how lonely it was, how individualistic he has had to become to survive in many regards, the death of his mother at an early age, and the similarities between him and Argo are striking, as very similar things happened on both sides. And we do get some revelations to do with Argo's parentage in there as well. I will say the sort of switch comes quite early in the way his personality is, which is why I'm putting it down more to the genetic experimentation than anything else, because it didn't quite sit right with me how suddenly kind of flipped to almost a paternal figure for someone who's quite individualistic. But it does make sense in terms of the arc that this character goes through throughout this, as we see the transformations begin to happen. Now, there is a really interesting supporting cast of other people who have been experimented upon, and I do actually really like the way the more animalistic sort of nature of some of these people is looked at in terms of how they were selected, what was selected for them to be manipulated with, and so on and so forth. And there are some really human elements to the way these characters react to the world. I would love to get a little bit more time with some of these characters, and there's some fascinating people in here, but this is a book one in a series. You cannot flesh everybody out straight from the get-go. And it does a good job of actually making you care about Caleb and as well Argo by the end of it, as he gets reintroduced later on in the book. And there are some natural antagonists here as well. So overall, whilst I do think the initial flip is a little bit quick, it can be explained away because of what's going on in the plot. It doesn't not make sense, and it doesn't take me out of it. So overall, I think the character work is pretty strong. I just want a little bit more build into some of the other characters, which I'm sure we will get in the later books in the series, but pretty solid. The world building here is not particularly heavy-handed, and a lot of it is based purely on insights from our main character. We don't get a massive amount of the world at large. What we do get paints a world that is pretty similar to now, in terms of it feels like it's teetering on the edge of something, and that's creating a sense of uncertainty and international strain, which explains what's going on here. You also have the ethical concerns that are brought up in terms of scientific experimentation, which we do also see in the real world, so I like that as well. We don't get a massive amount beyond that. What we do get, however, is stuff to do with the island itself, how the communities are formed, how they're kept in line. But also, this is based all from Caleb's perspective, and Caleb has had a very specific upbringing, which makes some of his insights very, very unreliable at times. And it makes it hard to tell what information we're receiving as a reader is unreliable, or if it's unreliable, I should say, because of Caleb, whether he's being given unreliable information on purpose, whether it's ignorance on the part of the people involved. We can't always tell, which does a good job of kind of hiding certain mysteries within the plot. We also get the idea of the funding of this just by the sheer scale of the amount of people that we meet that have been involved in this experiment and the various different points they are along with their treatments, inverted commas, which is also really, really good environmental storytelling. Throw in that you then have other factions that become involved throughout the story without spoiling too much, which gives you an idea in terms of scale and funding. And the island itself is kind of a mystery. Don't know how big it is, don't know where it is. We know what the weather's like. That's about it. We can't get off the island. So there's a lot of stuff we still do not know. And as we go through without spoiling anything, we get some little answers. We don't get a huge amount, and I like that, especially in a book one. So overall, I would say the fact that you have this kind of lack of clarity not only adds to the sense of mystery, but also the sense of tension that the characters are going through in terms of their survivability and also their reactions to the people that they meet throughout the story. So, nothing particularly groundbreaking. Again, I suspect we'll get more revelations in later books, but it does a good job of almost clouding the surroundings in a way that really does aid the story that's being told here. Presentation, then, really struggling to put this one into words that I'm happy with, if I'm completely honest. So we're going to start off with I like the pacing, I like the presentation, and I like the consistency of this. The word that comes to mind reading this is cinematic. This is really easy to visualize what's going on, and the way this is structured feels more like a movie than a book. So as an example of this, we get very little time with Caleb before he's dropped at the island. Whereas normally in a book, you'd establish the character, you give them some time, and then you change the status quo. We don't get much time with the normal. It drops us nearly straight in. And that allows the full arc to not feel rushed. And that feels more like the way it would be paced for a movie. Whereas normally you get a lot more time with Caleb at the beginning, you get to know him better, and then you'd change the status quo, and you'd actually cut off the story earlier on in the book. You won't get to the same point that this book does. You'd get like a vague reveal at the end. And that does two things. First off, it gives a real sense of narrative inertia to the story that drives it forward constantly, and it keeps the plot moving, especially with how entrenched Caleb is with that. And whilst you do get those moments of introspection, we don't get a huge amount about the world in general. Whilst Caleb does consider the effects of what these experiments are having on the people that are there, a lot of it feels very, very tied just to Caleb themselves. And there is a plot point specifically around that. The drawback of that is that whilst you meet all these amazing characters, we don't get as much time with them as I would ideally like, but that is often an issue in book ones anyway, as they have so much to establish. And because of the focus on this really fast-moving narrative, we don't get quite the emotional investiture in those characters that I would have ideally liked. Well, I'm saying that the narrative pulls itself forward really well, and it makes you want to keep reading, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the natural trade-off of this style of storytelling versus others. The other thing, and Kris does an amazing job with this actually, is when you're building the world and building characters out in a book one, you quite often have this really uneven pacing where you have to drop down to explain something about the world so you understand what's going on. And Kris establishes the various bits of information in here with really, really well-written dialogue that's believable. It doesn't feel like we're taken to one side to be info dumped on and then drop back in again. The conversations feel real, and you can imagine them again on screen, and that's what a lot of this is for me. This is imaginable as a series or part of a series of a TV show or a movie. And it's really, really interesting how well that Kris has managed to establish that in a way that is easy to visualize and actually almost hear in your own head as well. And I think the cover feeds into that a little bit as well. You know, the cover for me doesn't feel like a book cover. It feels like a movie poster. It has that sort of blockbuster feel. This won't look out of place in a cinema advertising an upcoming sci-fi movie. And I think the story of this actually does lend itself to that medium really well because of the way it's structured and paced. So overall, I think this is really interestingly done. I feel it's slightly atypical to what you'll normally read, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all. It does feel paced in a very specific way. I really enjoyed it. This is kind of, in some ways, I would describe this as a popcorn read, in that it keeps drawing you through it at pace by its narrative in a way that not many books do, and I don't see too many books that are structured like this person. Now, part of this may be because it's a single POV. It's been a while since I've read them. But it might be a little bit of that as well, because you don't have as much diverging on the characters as well. But I really enjoyed this. I read most of this in one sitting. I think I read 70% of this in one day. So kudos to Kris for that and creating a narrative that pulls me forward first rather than the characters. Really interestingly done and really well written as well. And the dialogue is top notch. Final thoughts then, and I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this a lot. I think this is a really strong debut novel from Kris, and thank you again for the art copy for review of this one. It's interestingly structured. The narrative is engaging and pulls you forward. There's an interesting arc for our main character, and there's plenty of interesting surrounding characters that I can't wait to learn more about in future books. Also avoids a lot of the trappings of other book ones in a series as well, and I think the actual subject of the narrative here, to do with genetic manipulation for military purposes, is a really interesting one. So overall, I would give this 4 stars out of 5. A really good debut novel. I enjoyed this one a lot. If you're after a fast-paced and engaging survival sci-fi novel, this is absolutely one I will recommend to you. And if you want to check out Kris's YouTube channel, I shall link it down below at A Fictional Escapist. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all very soon.